morning, afternoon, or evening to everybody, and welcome from the place you are joining us on this session of today, SafeDev Talks. It's a pleasure for me to have today here with a lot of several experts in our session of proactive risk management in DevSecOps. Today, the landscape is changing very quickly, and the security within the DevOps pipeline is not just beneficial, is mandatory, is necessary for sustainability and success of our software development practices. As the transformation is growing and is changing, we need to manage a lot of risk, and the growth is exponential. So we are facing each time more issues and more risk. So it's mandatory to adopt some proactive approach or to have something that allows us to take advance to the risk before they reach our application. Okay, so it's a pleasure for me to welcome and to introduce our panelists for today, experts in different areas. So they are going to provide a complementary and I think that very interesting point of view for all of you. First of all, 𝐿𝐵𝐻 Fan from EPAM Systems that architects the cloud security solutions to improve the security in the digital environments. He has led a lot of different approaches and systems, and beyond the architectural expertise, she promotes diversity and inclusion within the cybersecurity domain. So welcome, 𝐿𝐵𝐻. Pleased to have you here. 𝐼𝐻 𝐵𝐻, that is also in the principal force in the DevSecOps at Hysn Technologies, and he works in particular also in the OWASP SAP.NET API that is foundational, integrating the security practices in the software development. Welcome, 𝐼𝐻, also to you. And pleased to say hello also to Luis García from �W𝐚𝐺, that is also an expert in the DevSecOps and support �W𝐚𝐺 customers to integrate all these proactive measures and tools in the DevSecOps. So he has also a wide experience in other areas regarding the security in the development and the lifecycle of the application. So welcome everybody to this session, and thank you for being here.
Hi, Jesus.
I don't know if someone wants to add anything, that feel free to talk and to share your thoughts during the session. This is something that is just to discuss and to generate discussion. So don't hesitate to talk when you consider that you can provide something there. Okay, it's nothing very formal. Just to start, for example, starting with the basics is why the proactive risk control is so important for the security pipelines. Okay, at the end, we said that we are facing each time more and more risk, and we have to take a proactive approach in order to block or to mitigate them before they integrate in the pipeline, in the integration, and in the fabric of the software development. Different thoughts here. Okay, for example, 𝐼𝐻, you have been embedding security in the software development from the scratch of the processes and has experience in different organizations. So what's your thought or your views in integrating these capabilities and the potential impact in the development process? I don't know if they slow the process, other potential impacts in other areas. What's your thought or your experience in this part?
No, absolutely. Thank you. Great question to start with. So my experience with working with software developers or security in general, it's more than a decade now, and I was always in a position where I was contracted or contacted to improve the development of a product, and there were multiple ways to do that. Back in the day, penetration testing was the only thing that people did. And we had reports. People had to look into the reports, improve their software. This was about 15 years ago. That's what I knew when I was in the shoes of a developer, when I was developing software. But then when Agile and Scrum software way of working took the front stage, I had the opportunity to work with a lot of Agile coaches, and we always questioned things. How can we enable developers to build secure software on their own? So that's the primary question we tried to answer. We looked at models like SDL, we looked at the OWASP Open SAM maturity models. We looked at the building security and maturity model, BSIM, which was then published by a company called Digital Synopsys. So we created our very own thing. And we always looked at, okay, how can we integrate security proactively into software development? So that's the question we tried to answer. There were multiple approaches. Just like how an aircraft pilot is trained to take off and land, if you're a software developer and if you do not know how to write secure code, or if you're an architect and if you're not thinking about, if you don't have the knowledge of secure design, you wouldn't be able to write code or design secure systems. So education is something that we focused on, and there were multiple ways to do that. You could sit at classroom training, look at a tool, or learn security patterns. That's something that we dealt with. And in order to build governance into those systems, we looked at tooling. We called multiple vendors. There are a couple of IAST and RASP tooling right now, which were in their nascent stages back then, offering free trials. We looked at some of those, and there were no models to work with. The only models that we had back then was the traditional models, the BSIM, about what other companies are doing, so we can model our proactive risk controls within it. And then we've also looked at risk frameworks like ISO 27001, which talks about more than 100 controls. But when it comes to software development, there are only one or two controls that relate to them. So people, aspects of educating people, and then looking at processes, and then bringing tooling into that stack. So all of those were the key pillars that any IT transformation depends on. So the proactive ways of building security into software development, we also modeled some of our ways of reducing risk using the pillars of people, processes or practices, and technology. It involved a lot of effort. Now we had to learn by doing trial and error. We didn't really succeed the first time. There were some lessons, but when we got engaged with further customers afterwards, we tried improving them, and everything was pretty contextual. Different customers had different security priorities, and we really had to cater to some of those varying context, industries, or domains.
Very good summary. People, processes, and tools.
Absolutely.
I don't know, 𝐿𝐴, for example, if in cloud, that probably you are more focused on cloud, is more or less the same, or is something that is specific from the cloud. At the end, cloud solutions are going to be exposed to internet. It's like a very high risk. You usually need some additional, or is even more important, this proactive risk management approach, or the sense of the cloud is something specific, or according to your experience is more or less the same than in other cases?
Yeah, I mean, from the cloud perspective, apart from we also need to implement secure by design, defense in depth. Those are the very basic strategic approach that we need to implement in all for all businesses. So in terms of cloud, I mean, proactive risk management is also a very critical step. So, for example, before we implement a cloud solutions into the environment, we need to perform a business impact assessment and a risk assessment. We need to identify the threats. We need to perform a threat modeling to identify the potential threats and potential risk that we are facing. So to do that, we would also be able to look at things like the classification of the data that we are potentially using in this environment, and then how that risk is feeding into the entire environment, and how can we mitigate. Then we can look at the security controls we can implement to mitigate those risks. So yeah, proactive risk management is very important when we are looking at the cloud environment, when designing a cloud solutions, and I think it's an essential step that we need to take before we can implement or design any cloud infrastructure or solutions.
Mm-hmm. The preparation, very important to be prepared and to do this assessment to prioritize and have the full picture. Thank you very much, Emma. Luis, I don't know.
Yeah.
Automation. We are doing a lot of analysis, tools, processes, high volume of risk manually. I think that doing this manually is a bit difficult. I don't know the role of automation, for example, or how do you usually manage this with the customers?
Well, automation is probably the last step of this proactive risk control, because I remember from probably you as well, some years ago when security was not a requirement. The requirement was only to develop the application. Of course, that I am been always involved in application security, but not so much in cloud security or in other aspects. No? But I remember some years ago when security was not a requirement, and the first step on this risk control was to introduce some tool, basically some scanner to scan the source code, etc. At the very beginning was triggered manually, but as this proactivity will go further, we'll move to automation. How to set up an automation schema in order to assess a security risk, in a proper way. Basically, the teams started to automate the scan using a SafeDev approach. That usually is the best and the easiest way to start with this proactive risk control. And as I told you, I usually work with customers of 𝐶𝐤𝐻, because 𝐶𝐤𝐻 is a product, not only in the source code, but also in other aspects. And it's quite important to make some automation to avoid manual integration, because when you automate, for example, including the scanner in the CI/CD pipelines, you are able to report to the proper actors to solve the problem in a moment that is easy to do it, and not at a later stage that is more expensive, etc. You have the opportunity to block the pipelines, etc., etc. So this is the way that we usually embed the security control into the software development lifecycle, basically in the pipelines or at the developer level at the IDE. This is the usual approach.
So at the end is the more to the left, the more proactive is everything. You start doing everything sooner, and these things. Okay.
Yeah. This is an overall approach. A SafeDev is a good approach, but as you can guess, sometimes, I will say that security is not free. Security sometimes is against agility. So you must combine which kind of scan or security check is done in which step. So let's say the source code, the dependencies, or the CI/CD, these configurations. The changes are not so the same and not so often in every part of the life cycle. So you probably, So okay, it's a good approach, SafeDev, but sometimes you need to think about what is the best part, no? To include a specific scanner.
In fact, I think that, for example, Maran has mentioned the processes, and we have processes in different stages of the software development lifecycle. And I mentioned also that it's very important to do the initial assessment for the business impact, the type of the data that we are managing, and this kind of thing. So at the end, yes, we have like different stages. Probably, or just your view, for example, is we have to manage the risk in each of these stages. I don't know if there is any difference between one stage or another, for example, or if there is different approaches to integrate the proactivity depending on if we are developing, if we are doing the integration, if we are doing the testing. I don't know, Maran, for example, that you have experience with the agile development. I don't know if there are different approaches, adapted, or is more or less the same, adapted or automated in different ways, or?
Now, my take on that would be you will have to have different approaches on integrating security at different stages. Luis mentioned shift left, and he also appropriately said it has to be contextual. Does shift left make sense in a certain scenario? Of course, the cost of fixing a bug early in the development lifecycle compared to the cost of fixing a bug once it's close to production, people say it's 100 times more, and it's based on a survey done by IBM 30 to 40 years ago. So shift left, of course, it's a real thing. So one of my friend and I, some years ago, we were talking, we've been bombarded by this term shift left, and we were thinking, you got to shift left, but you have to shift it right, only when it makes sense, and automate things only when it makes sense. So Emma, you mentioned threat modeling, right? I mean, when is it a right time to threat model? Well, the absolute great time to threat model is to do it when you're designing the software. But what's the best time to do it? Even before that, when you're even thinking about the requirements of the software, that's even a great time. But we have missed that train. We're already in the integration stage. Can we threat model? Yes, we can threat model. Is the cost of changing the design going to be more? Absolutely, it's going to be more, because redesigning something is going to considerably take a lot of amounts of time and effort. So that particular act, of course, you could do threat modeling at any point in time to reduce risks proactively in your software or system. But when done early, it can have more benefits. When done late, you're going to have to pay a higher price, but the result, you would be reducing risks, right? And then you touched upon SCA and component analysis. Before the advent of containers and Kubernetes, this was much, much easier. You just had to deal with your software and code. And now you've had infrastructure layers added on by your containers, and they bring in their operating system. It just becomes complicated and complicated over time. So when is it really a right time to do an activity like SCA?
May I refine, probably, Maran, the question also for Emma, is should we manage or try to control the same type of risk in every stage, or the risks are different in each stage? For example, secrets are more critical in the development, IEC is more critical in the deployment, or the threat model in Emma. I don't know if you do only at the beginning, or you refresh, or you have other additional capabilities also, just to go deeper in this approach from Maran.
Yeah, so my role is a cloud security architect, right? So when I am incorporated into, my role is incorporated into like a software development process, when the team needs to develop a software and release in maybe 6 months, right? And then what they need me is not only at the beginning, at the design stage. If you look at the secure software process, we have different stages. We have design, and we have coding, and then we build application, putting things together, and we deploy into the environment, right? And then we even need to monitor and maintain the runtime environment. So all of those stages, each of those stages have different type of risk, and you need to manage them in a different ways. So the one experience that I observe is that my development team asked me to identify the testing approach for each of those stages, for each of those for different type of security controls, right? So now we identify the risk, and then we have identified the security controls that is needed to implement to mitigate those risks. Then how do we verify those? So even in terms of testing approach, we have different type of tests that we can use to verify those security controls are implemented. So that's my intake for the for like the software development process, especially in the cloud environment where everything is distributed, and your workload can be hosted in multiple environments as well. Application is no longer talking to one component, but it can talk to multiple services because we have APIs. That is probably the norm now. And the last thing I would say is, even with the software development approach, we still need to ensure that all this process is aligned with zero trust principle, because zero trust principle has been applied and has been adopted by a lot of organizations as like a wider cloud security strategy, right? But this is not just it's a tech savvy word. It's not just a marketing word. It is actually that you need to implement those security controls that align with the zero trust principle of assume breach, verify trust, and then least privilege permissions. So you need to implement all those controls to be able to grant for each of your users' accounts and workload identities and application components the right amount of access to the service, and monitor them all the time. So yeah, so I think it's a holistic approach. It's not just looking at one single stage, and each stages have different type of risk that we are facing. So it's not all equal.
Mm-hmm. Very good.
Definitely. And as I'm hearing, and we are probably mixing two different things, no? Because Marin and you, Emma, has mentioned penetration test in order to see if a risk is still there or not. It's like a way of testing. I work more in not in the penetration testing, but from internal, from a white box, no? In order to discover risks that are embedded not only in the code, but also in the configuration of the tools and in other parts. No? So this is a combination. I think that there are complementary approaches, no, to the security. Threat modeling is useful, of course, at the very beginning in the design, but can all the risk be modeled, or probably the security tools that we are using are discovering risks that we are not aware of? This is because, of course, that threat modeling is imperative. This is a must, okay? But we also must use specific products in different parts. In the source code, there are some risks. In the CI/CD infrastructure, there are some risks. In the infrastructure as code, in the deployment of the application, etc., etc. So the risks are very, very different in every part, and we need to have different tools in order to discover those hidden risks that the threat modeling probably has not been taken into account. No? So definitely both type of tools in scanning tools and also penetration testing tools are complementary in order to guarantee the security of the whole infrastructure, not only the product, the whole infrastructure.
Thank you very much. I think probably just to try to provide some sample to help to understand some situations. For example, Maran, you mentioned the education is very important for the developers, and in order to have or to make them to have this approach for the security. Emma, you have mentioned also different samples of security, less privilege, and other samples of doing that has to be implemented. And Luis, you have mentioned also other different type of risks. I don't know if you could share some sample that could be told here, demonstrated or illustrating this approach in the different areas. For example, Mara, regarding how we discover a risk and how we teach or educate the developers or show the impact. Or Emma, how do you design the less privileged requirements and how do you implement or adapt to in later phases, for example? Or Luis, how do you integrate or how do you automate certain types of security, just to put something practice in the mind of the people attending? You're there, I don't know, how do you prefer? Emma, I don't know, or Luis, probably you want?
Yeah. Regarding the automation, usually what is most known is when you talk about automation is automation into the detection of risk from a point of view, okay, from scanning tools. Okay, usually the customers try to automate the detection of the risks and stop that. They integrate the scanner into a CI/CD pipeline, and magically a lot of issues appear. Okay, it's enough. I don't think so. I think that there are other areas that needs to be addressed by automation. One of them is reporting the vulnerabilities to the proper team and in the proper way, in the proper channel. Okay, it's quite important. In my experience, it's quite important that the reporting should be automatic and in the same tools that the users, developers mainly uses. For example, if they are using some ticketing system like Jira, or even you can report the vulnerabilities in the same IDE, etc. This reporting should be smart and also automated. No? Another part is, what about any I've found many customers that when they configure a security tool, they say, oh, how many vulnerabilities I have? Hundreds, thousands. So the customer wants some tool to automatically prioritize those bunch of issues. Why? Because they don't want to alert anyone with no need. They don't want to waste time prioritizing the vulnerabilities by the security experts. So for me, it's quite important to have some mechanism that from the bunch of vulnerabilities discovered, they can reduce to concentrate only in those that really are important. Overriding false positive, or introducing criteria to give more priority to some issues than other. And this is in automated way. And there are ways. Here inside Jelly, we have some functionality that help to do that. Not only to do it, but also in automated way. And finally, that is another aspect of the automation for me very important, is the remediation. Okay, what if we could automatically remediate some of the vulnerabilities that we have found? That is very good. Why? Because you don't need to have some human to do that. So, at the degree that it's possible, some automatic mechanism to remediate. For example, if we find secret or credentials, to revoke them, or to open pull requests to solve vulnerabilities in open source dependencies, all that stuff, all that things can be automated and reduce the workload of the security department. So automation is a key aspect, but not only in detection, on also in the other domains.
Madam, you are saying you agree with Luis. You have additional samples, for example, I don't know, regarding education or training or informing the developers or the DevOps managers or people.
Absolutely. Luis mentioned automation is key, and he touched upon this point of people integrate a scanner and they think they're done. But what you see more and more in those kind of contexts is the lack of accountability. Who's going to look into it? Who's going to fix it? And then the other problem you describe is the actual alert fatigue. People are fatigued by the amount of noise and the alerts. We were in this situation once where we had a scanner that connected to a source code repository like GitHub, imported all the projects in their organization, and all of a sudden we've got about 10 million vulnerability or 1 million vulnerabilities. We really didn't know which one to fix. Even the security officer there didn't have a clue of which one of those 1,000 plus projects are actively being used on the new thing that they were working on. So it's a great tool. It provided great insights into vulnerabilities in source code, vulnerabilities in dependencies, vulnerabilities in infrastructure as code as well to a certain extent. But then the idea there was to mitigate, proactively address risks. Yeah. That's why they purchased the tool. Yeah. But beyond that, what could be done, it wasn't planned. Right. But what I would say, if you were thinking about mitigating risks, well, at least you're a step ahead because you purchased a tool, you thought about automation, and you can figure out the rest of the things as you learn, as you go, by contacting experts or by contacting tool vendors, even companies like 𝐿𝐴𝐻 who can help you think about, address some of those risks, help you become a partner. And from an education perspective, you can learn in a classroom training, get a certification like the ones that we have in our company, Practical DevSecOps, or you can also learn by purchasing a static analysis tool to learn secure coding to a certain extent by looking at the results.
I have some questions, but I would like to listen to Emma regarding, for example, these capabilities and if when they design the threat modeling and the things, they also design how to respond to the risk, or in case of something happens, if they have also the solution to respond to the appearance of the risk. Or
so I don't have a specific examples of, when I see when I mitigate a risk and then the instance has been later on happened, and then we see the benefit of that. But I do have like the similar example that is happening in the cloud environment. I will not say cloud environment is more relevant to the cloud identity. So there were an instance with my first customer that the MFA and the conditional access control has been failed. So an attacker was able to get into the system get into the system and potentially poke around the environment. The key here is when we have this kind of thing happens, it might be that, it might be due to a very, very simple mistake that, for example, the identity was leaked and, bad password was used, or even there are attack that targeting the MFA, even that is implemented. So if that happens, the thing we need to do here is to minimize the damage of that attack. So how do we do this? Things like we need to implement encryption on the data. So even attacker get hold of the data, they wouldn't be able to see the content of the data because it has been encrypted. And we can see things like if we implementing the network segmentation in the environment, whether it's in the cloud or hybrid or on-prem, is the same. So if we implement those segmented environments, which means that attacker wouldn't be able to get from one environment to another. And also we need to, because this is another question of defense in depth. It's not like we are done there if we just implementing a MFA, because we are not done there, because we need to ensure that the internal system is also secure and we can prevent things like lateral movements that can mostly happen. Yeah, and also we need to ensure that we don't have a legacy system exist in our environment that can be a vulnerable point for the attacker to jump on and then leverage and then to be leveraged that to exploit the internal system. So I've seen a lot of incidents where the legacy system has been leveraged by the attacker to get into the other services within the environment, like even like Microsoft Exchange, something like that. The email system, yeah. I mean, it's yeah. So the key is to implement the defense in depth, in these instances, so to prevent the things like lateral movement or elevated access by the attacker.
I like to thank you very much, Emma, because we have been talking about the risk and remediation, automation and detection, but it's very important. The proactivity is also in thinking the measures and the response in case something happens, even in production. That could be later than the risk that we are, at least is, for example, considering in the build process, but proactivity is also even in the design to design what we have or how we have to design the system. Very interesting thought. Thank you very much, Em. And that is, sorry, Luis, yeah, are you going to say something?
Yeah. I was thinking that we are talking about, let's say, to close or to fix vulnerabilities, okay? Some things that occasionally can be used by some bad people in order to attack our system or product. No? But what about malware or malicious code? Software that we are using it in many ways, in dependencies, in GitHub Actions, in plugins, etc., etc., etc. There is a lot of software that we are consuming that we think that is valid,
Secure.
is secure. Why? Because it's open source, and we want to believe that open source is safe because there are too many eyes looking at it. But that is not true. That is not true. That is not true at all. There are, in my practice, for example, in my daily practice, we are fighting with this kind of of malicious code that is embedded into many different open source software. Not only I am thinking of open source dependencies in the package manager, I am also thinking in, as I told you, if you are using, for example, GitHub, you are using a lot of GitHub actions that are publicly there. You just use it, and that's all. Or in other platforms, there are similar plugins or contributions. So we are consuming a lot of those. So we need some mechanism to detect this. And this is not so easy as to find some vulnerability in the source code on the configuration of a CI/CD product. We need to use another mechanism to be protected against this malicious code that has been designed to do something that malicious code does not need to have a third party attacking. The malicious code is the actor. As soon as it's installed, it does whatever it's doing. So I want to also to highlight this way of attacking is more than protecting, closing the doors, because I can imagine a castle that is with the towers very high, but there is an open door, and there is a lot of people coming in and coming out every day, every hour, and there is a guard out there only looking at the face, but you don't know who is entering and out. So, well, I wanted to highlight these malicious and malware attacks that are so common right now.
Yes, thank you very much, Luis. You mentioned before, and Maran also, and the tons of risk that we are able to discover or to reach or to raise. So, Maran, for example, your experience in the agile teams and these kind of things, what's the traditional or the most extended way to prioritize or to manage this amount of risk? I don't know if it's because of the priority, distributed team, and each one only focus on certain parts. What's the most extended way to manage with this? Or probably is, I don't care, I'm going not to put focus on that because I don't have time, I don't have people to manage that. That is something that sometimes happens. So
Sure. The way we approach that problem, or the way I would want to answer that question, is from a non-security perspective. Development teams and software development teams, and you might know this, they have figured out ways of fixing bugs. They have figured out ways of addressing technical debt. So if you think about it, they know which bug has the highest priority because it's affecting whether all users or not. It's not affecting data, but it's affecting all users. They have severity levels for bugs and all those things. Because I wasn't born into a security background when I started with software development, so I tend to relate these things, and it helps working with software development teams together, right? And even now, people fight. I mean, development and security teams have a lot of friction. So some of the ways you can ease into that is to be where developers are, like into the tooling, like Luis mentioned. Are they using Jira for their backlog management? Try and tap into that. Are they using Slack for communications? Try and tap into that. Are they using IDEs? In which case, do you have plugins or communication systems to show developers a mirror of their security practices? This is your state of code, and you can probably fix it in a certain way, right? And Luis mentioned about open source and malware, which got me thinking. Okay, we've had Heartbleed. It wasn't a malware, but it was from one of the widely open sourced the SSL OpenSSL plugin, and we've had Shell Shock. We've had the Spectre. That was a different thing. Spectre was a different thing, but all of these were from open source components. But a non-friction way of working with development teams is to use their way of managing technical debt. So many teams have this thing of, okay, I'm doing Scrum and I have to deliver software every 2 weeks or in a month, but how am I going to address my bugs, the regular bugs, not security bugs, but the regular business bugs, coding errors and other things. So they kind of have like a 1 day in those 2 weeks or a 10% capacity in their entire capacity, and they try and address those bugs there. So if I have a security report, how can I put that into their Jira backlog or Azure DevOps backlog and help them address it within their 10% of time or 1 day? So if you kind of follow this approach, you're working together with them. You're not trying to be a security enforcer, but you're trying to find ways of working with them. And over a 6 months or a 3 months period of time, you're eventually going to see from a high level a reduction in the number of security bugs. So,
okay, but at the end, there is someone that take the full list, review, prioritize according to their own criteria or their experience or expertise, and then, for example, this topic that you mentioned at the beginning, the accountability, say, okay, you have to solve this risk, you have to solve this other risk. So it's something like manual, and based on the experience or the knowledge of this person that is reviewing the full list, maybe just to trying to say, okay, I have 10% of the time of the team, I can do this 20 issues or whatever, more or less. No,
it also depends. It can either be 10%,
okay.
5%, or 50%.
Yeah, it's an example. Yeah.
Right. I just wanted to make it simple and give that ballpark figure. But at the same time, different vulnerabilities need to be approached in a different way as well. We've got CVSS scoring, which is like the most complicated of all. But sometimes you might need simple things like, we all know SQL injection. Nobody wants to have that. That needs to be.
Yeah.
Developers also have that understanding.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, a lightweight, frictionless approach. And I would want to say again what Luis said: be where developers are, use their existing practices, help them review the current state of security in their software. And of course, if they don't follow you, you will have to take a stick sometimes and enforce accountability, if I could say that.
Okay. Emma, you want to say something? Probably your approach is a bit different.
Yeah. I think alert fatigue is a real problem in our security operations, right? So when your team has been bombarded with a lot of streams of alerts, it becomes really difficult to separate the signals from the noises. So the way that I used to deal with it is to integrate tools like exploit prediction scoring system, EPSS. So some of the audience might have heard about this approach. So this is a very good way to be integrated into the vulnerability management program. So EPSS is a open source management model. It's like it used to predict the likelihood of the security vulnerability being exploited in the wild. So when you use it in combination of the CVSS score, it would be really efficient to manage the vulnerability. Take an example. If we have 20 high severity vulnerability in our system and we only prioritize the remediation of the vulnerability that has a EPSS score of 75%, which means that is a highly likely high likelihood of being exploited, then the amount of effort required to fix that will be significantly reduced. But however, there is a caveat to this approach, though. I would like to highlight is the scores of dynamic, which means that our threat data could change over time, and this requires our team to regularly fetch the new data in order to make the data relevant. And another thing worth mentioning is this also depending on the company's risk appetite, because
Yeah.
if for like a financial companies with strong regulations, compliance requirements, then if if a high vulnerability has been able to exploit it, even it hasn't been exploited before, then the consequences of that is high. So they can't be they can't be afforded to, to have any high level, high severity vulnerabilities being exploited in the environment, which means their EPSS score will be really, really low, because they have to ensure the high coverage of the vulnerability remediation. So yeah, so if you use it in a smart way, like to align with your risk appetite in your business, you will be able to implement EPSS with the CVSS score in a more effective way.
I think that is very important, Emma, what have you told mentioning EPSS. Indeed, we in our daily practice, we use EPSS as a score that substitutes the CVSS exploitability score. Because in the CVSS is theoretical. No? And as you mentioned, it's very important that the EPSS score changes over the time. So that is the need to have an automated prioritization mechanism that as soon as, for example, the exploitability of one vulnerability changes and now is more likely, they can notify that event to the proper audience. So quite happy for you to mention that, because I think that it's very important to provide an automation for those kind of changes in the prioritization. Yeah.
Very much, really interesting, this score. Yeah. We are just 5-6 minutes for the end. So yes, I don't know. Last 2-3 minutes for each of you, just to give the audience some takeaways or the most important things, or the tips they could apply in their day-to-day according to your experience, just to summarize the main ideas, for example, that you have shared during the session. And if you can add something about how do you see the evolution of the practice, the risk management, I don't know, with new regulations, new capabilities in the technology, or new processes. So yes, these 2-3 takeaways and your view of the evolution of this topic. The order, up to you. Maran?
Okay, I'll go. So for me in particular, when we're working with integrating a security tooling, particularly today, we have a lot of acronyms in the DevSecOps space. There are plenty of tooling as well. Some companies prefer open source, but they lack they lack a unified single pane of glass. You will have to build tailored solutions around it. So some cloud solutions have this risk score to indicate the amount of security controls you've passed versus the amount of security controls you need to improve on. So if when we prefer integrating tooling into DevSecOps, I'd like to see a tool provide a unified view of my entire risks in the different stages, right? Like Luis mentioned, my infrastructure as code, my open source dependencies, my source code, and my cloud environment as well. So I can manage my posture accordingly. And I'd like to see a risk score of where, what my level of risk is, right? And from then on, I'd also like to get a developer's and operations view of I'm a developer. How can I use this information to remediate? I'm an operations person. What's my most effective way of addressing some of those things? So that's where that's the kind of tool from an automation and tooling technology perspective that we kind of want to prefer integrating into DevSecOps, not just something that just one thing. Then you will have to deal with, building your own dashboards and reporting platforms.
Thank you very much, madam. Emma?
Yeah. So from the cloud perspective, the kind of strategic approach that I would recommend would be first of all, we want to fix the issue of misconfiguration in the cloud, because it was predicted 99% of the cloud security failures will be at the customer's fault. So it's not that it's not that the cloud provider is messed up. It's our customer. It's customer with us. Yeah, because a lot of them can be triggered by, can be a consequences of a misconfiguration in the cloud. It can be anything from human errors to software bugs. So what do we do to fix this? We can, one thing is we can implement the infrastructure as code and policy as code, which means that we use code to define our cloud resources, including the security configurations, because we use the policy as code. And then we can automate that into the deployment of our infrastructure. This way, we can reduce the amount of human errors. The second approach I would recommend is to integrate the cloud security assessment into your risk management, into your entire security operations as well, because you want to enable automatic remediation as well as part of that process. I mean, we talk about a lot of automations as well. So this assessment would be able to ensure that you can address the misconfigurations in your environment and the vulnerability and potential compliance violation, because in a lot of times you can configure the tool to align with the security.
Thank you very much, Emma.
That's my intake.
Thank you very much. No, sorry, it's because I have some cut on the sound.
Yeah.
I didn't know if you finished. Thank you very much. Very interesting, these two topics. Please.
Yeah, from my point of view, the key points in all this is again back to automation. Automation, as I told before, at least in four aspects that are detection or assessment, vulnerability assessment, prioritization. I think that is a good point about automation, reporting, and also remediation. For me, are four domains that automation should cover. Not enough because, as Emma and Mara mentioned before, threat modeling, security policies, definition, all of that from the very beginning are needed, but also we need to automate the what we call the warrants, how to guarantee that those policies are met during the software development lifecycle, and the capacity to stop the process if some of the practices are against those policies.
Thank you very much, Luis. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
I think we have one or two questions. One is from Jim. Is asking what framework and scale do you recommend for risk or risk assessment or risk management? I think we have mentioned some of them, EPSS or the traditional CVE databases. I don't know if you want to complement or explain a bit more. Anyone?
So I think for this question, sorry, who else wants to go? Okay, I can go ahead. Yeah, so it's really depending on, you know, what kind of services what kind of component of the software, or if you are looking into the cloud environment, what are you assessing? What are you assessing for risk if you want to ask this question? So there are a lot of framework. So I would say in general, NIST is a good framework to be used because it is most comprehensive, and it have more specialized framework that are available for different types of for different purpose. Even for AI, there's a AI risk management framework that is AIF that is available for NIST. And also you have a lot of benchmark for CIS. So these ones are the most technical one that is more specifically for hardening your environment. So things like you can implement those in order to configure your environment to ensure that your environment is has security configurations implemented. So yeah, so it kind of depends on what do you want to assess. And there also, in terms of software development, we have OWASP. OWASP is a good framework. I mean, it's a good. They have a lot of standards that we can use to as a reference when we are addressing vulnerabilities in the software development lifecycle. So when you're building an app, so it's different, and it's different framework for different environments.
Or sure. Also, for example, if you are interested in software supply chain security, you can use OSCAR, OSCNR. That is a very good framework to securize the supply chain. So depending on the domain, there are many specific frameworks for that.
Thank you very much. I hope, Jim, that the answer is okay. Another question, we have another question regarding something that Baran mentioned before. It's regarding the lack of resources to manage these security issues or the regular review of the security topics. Who usually or who adopts in general the role of enabler or a sponsor for the security issues? I don't know if it's the Scrum Master, a specific person from the security team. What's your view on this?
So it's pretty contextual. Sometimes it's the security officer. Sometimes it's the security champion role. And sometimes it is the Scrum Master because there is no one else to take up that role. But usually it trickles down to someone like a security architect as well, or a development manager who contracted a company to implement DevSecOps. So it can be a development manager or a portfolio manager as well, who is in charge of implementing DevSecOps for their particular program that they're operating on. And they can further hold someone else responsible for getting things done within the lower levels of teams that actually code and code infrastructure or software or manage cloud for that instance.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. I think there is no more questions. So we are a bit late than expected. So thank you very much, Maran, Emma, Luis. Thank you for your contribution, your experience. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today in our session today. I hope you have some new tips or some new food for thought in order to apply your day-to-day. see you in our next episode of the SafeDev Talks that we are doing every month. Okay. Thank you very much to everybody. See you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.